Welcome to The More Perfect Union, a podcast about the joy we get from American politics, or as we like to call it, real debate without the hate. Hello, I'm Kevin Kelton. I'm a Democrat, and I live in Los Angeles, California.
I'm Molly Cooper, and I'm your free market enthusiast living in Columbus, Ohio.
I'm Rebecca Kushmiter, and I am a gleeful liberal living in Kensington, Maryland.
I'm Cliff Dunn. I'm a Republican from Newport News, Virginia.
I'm Helena Henry, an evangelical conservative from Colleyville, Texas.
I'm DJ McGuire, a conservative Democrat, or tonight a congested Democrat from Suffolk, Virginia.
And The More Perfect Union can be heard on iTunes, Facebook, and at our website, moreperfectunionpodcast.com, where you can also find host bios and commentary. And remember to check our midweek More Perfect After Dark podcast, where we take you behind the scenes to hear what we chat about once the official show is over. Well, we can't start this week on any other topic except Trumpcare, which met its final demise, I hope, this week. But maybe you guys think otherwise. What do you guys think happened, and what do you think comes next?
Well, I think he's dead, Jim. In the words of Captain Kirk, he's dead, Jim.
I have to say, Trumpcare has made being a conservative Democrat far more easier than I had any right to expect. It was perfect. It got opposition from both right and left, and deservedly so. It was a complete dog's breakfast, and it was part of really something that has been, I think, something that has been a disease within the Republican Party, and particularly the Republicans in Congress for quite some time. But before I get into that, I'm curious to hear what the rest of the group thinks.
Well, my dog Gracie Bell takes offense at you analogizing Trumpcare to her delicious food. So that's her stance. I have to say, I'm surprised, speaking not for the dog, but for human Helena. I'm surprised. I thought it was going to pass. When Trump took the approach that he did with the Freedom Caucus, essentially saying, do it now or you're going to end up with Obamacare, I thought that would motivate them, because they understand and appreciate that Trump is not ideologically motivated and honestly probably doesn't care either way from a policy perspective what happens, and that the attraction of issuing an ultimatum and sticking to it would be too strong for Trump to resist. So I thought that would do it, and it didn't.
I'm actually unsurprised that the Freedom Caucus held strong. That's so consistent of them. They're this unusual, almost admirable animal within Congress in that they don't care what other people think. They don't care about seniority. They don't care about gaining rank within leadership of the party. They don't care about bringing money home to their district. And I don't know that any of them really care about getting reelected. They won't take it personally. So they can work from a strictly ideological point of view. And it's fascinating to see them really come together in lockstep like this. I'm sure they were the bane of John Boehner's existence for, his years as Speaker of the House. And they're no more governable under Paul Ryan or Donald Trump. They don't want to be told what to do. They want to do it their way. And I don't know if there's a historical analogy for them. They're really interesting.
So I didn't think that they would care about not being reelected. I thought they would care about being stuck with Obamacare and forfeiting the opportunity to end up with something slightly more palatable, even if it had a host of problems.
So my question for everyone is, what did these people want? And don't tell me in just generalities they wanted to lower costs. What specific planks did they want in the bill that would have been voted on Thursday or Friday that they didn't get?
They wanted the end of all types of mandates. They didn't want the individual mandate that forced consumers to buy it. They didn't want
that was out.
Right, that they didn't want the employer mandates.
That was out.
They didn't want insurance companies to be mandated in what they had to cover.
That was all out. It was all out.
Not all of it. They didn't want pre-existing
conditions,
and they didn't want till age 20. They didn't want till age 26.
Yeah, they basically wanted to dismantle the entire bill and take it down to the studs and they weren't going to settle for less. And honestly, I think they were being a little bit ornery. I think that there may have been some element of their faction that wanted to just stick it to leadership.
I'm not sure that they wouldn't settle for less. They could have settled if there had been something that would have, in any kind of actual way lowered costs. They could have come around on some other things. But since there was nothing there that was going to bend the curve, it's certainly, they were not going to be convinced as it was, as the Obamacare light that was put up was certainly not going to bring them in.
Look, the fact of the matter, the fact of the matter is, in general, the American Unhealthy and Careless Act was just as regulatory and just as much of a regulatory mess as the Patently Deficient and Unaffordably Careless Act was in 2010. The only difference was the regulations were tweaked a little here, the subsidies were stretched out to help more middle-class folks, more white folks, frankly, and they were smaller subsidies for the less fortunate. But in terms of some of the things that the Freedom Caucus care about, which is reducing government size, scope, and cost, less government regulation in the economy, less government regulation in health insurance, less government regulation in healthcare, Trumpcare gave them none of that. So they had no incentive to support it, and they didn't.
If I recall right, and please correct me if I'm wrong on this, DJ, but a number of the changes that they would have wanted, dealing with the regulations and so forth, would have not been compatible with using reconciliation. And
yeah, that was absolutely true. They weren't germane.
And so when I made the crack earlier about them wanting a pony, part of the problem is this was the best thing they could get under a 51 vote scenario in the Senate. What they wanted would require 60 votes, and that wasn't going to go anywhere.
This goes back to a larger problem that the Republicans have faced over the last 10 or 20 years, in that the assumption is that they can essentially, in their minds, they can only rely on fellow Republicans to get stuff enacted. Ronald Reagan never acted like that. Ronald Reagan put a position, he planted his flag essentially as far right on the economic spectrum as he could on an issue, and then he gauged the mood on Congress. And if Democrats said, hey, we want you to move a foot or a yard to the left and we'll support this, then he did that. Republicans have forgotten the notion of presenting a negotiating position and then negotiating outward to build support. They don't do that anymore. Paul Ryan's entire plan on this was to essentially come up with something. He essentially negotiated with himself, presuming that he knew what moderates would want or what conservatives want, without ever bothering to ask them. What they should have done is said, this is what we want to do, and then gauge what would have happened, and then change it as people responded, including as Democrats responded. To a large extent, that's what Barack Obama did with the Patently Deficient and Unaffordably Careless Act, in that he moved towards moderate Democrats on various things. Republicans basically threw up their hands and said, no, we don't want to deal with any of it. But there's no guarantee that all Democrats would have done that. This was a legislative strategy mistake that led to a policy that really nobody in the Republican Party wanted. And so it's really not a surprise that the thing fell apart.
So I don't know that there's a universe where Trump is able to build some sort of coalition with the Democrats for a couple of reasons. I think he's in a unique position in that he, again, doesn't ideologically care and probably would not be opposed to something that was further left than a traditional Republican president would want. But I think he is so toxic to the Democrats and so toxic to the Democratic base that the elected officials of that party are going to take their stance against him and make their opposition to Trump a key component of their case for re-election. I think he's become something that they won't go near with a 10-foot pole, and that's going to prevent any sort of consensus or working with Democrats in a Reagan-esque way.
I tend to agree with you, Helena, on that one. And I also think that Trump's noise about working with Democrats moving forward is another empty threat. I don't think he actually wants to do it. I think he wants to scare the Freedom Caucus into thinking he'll do it.
I find it interesting that you would use the term threat to describe that, Rebecca. I would say, for what it's worth, DJ, the scenario that comes to mind with the Obamacare passage is if Obama had faced a situation where you'd had 30 or 40 Democrats on the left who were willing to blow up the bill if it didn't have single payer. That's about what I think the Republicans were facing.
Can I go back to this, the concept of whether this is like really dead once and for all? I'm going to quote the brilliant Peggy Noonan here, who said they picked the wrong issue at the wrong time and pursued it in the wrong way. And I'm wondering if we might not see this kind of get resurrected at the time, say come October, November, when open enrollment comes back and everybody's bills are coming out, and more big insurers leave the exchanges, and we have these same reoccurring problems that we've been having for the last several years. And if that doesn't bring pressure to bear to recycle this yet again, as opposed to right now when everybody's already enrolled for the year and they've just kind of dealt with it and it's kind of not at the fore.
I don't think so, because I think that by October of this year, everyone is going to be in re-election mode and isn't going to want to rock any boats at all. I think this issue's become toxic for both parties.
The other problem is that it's come out all over the place in the last few days. They set this up like a pool game, like a billiards game, that they had to get healthcare out of the way first to knock all that tax revenue off the incoming revenue for the fiscal year, so that they had a lower baseline by which they could now do tax reform. Now everything is back asswards for them. So not only can they not come back to this and accomplish what they wanted to do, which was really lower the tax base so that they could have more flexibility to give money back to the rich, but if they want to take those subsidies and make them tax breaks, that will throw off any tax reform that they come up with. So let's say they negotiate and they pass some kind of a tax reform bill now. If they come back 2 months later and say, well, now we're going to turn all of the subsidies into tax breaks for people getting Trumpcare, that will screw up their new tax reform. So I think they're handcuffed either way.
I'm not so sure about that, because I'm not certain about the tax side of Obamacare, in particular in terms of how that would affect future revenues down the line. The fact of the matter is not the reconciliation rules, but the rules regarding tax reform and tax changes, they're sort of treated on their own as individual bills. You can't say, oh, well, we did some tax reductions over in Obamacare that we're going to bank in our tax reform.
That's exactly what they were going to do, DJ. It's all over the place.
Well, I think it was going to help them with scoring from the CBO, whatever that's worth. I mean,
it had to do with the difference between making a tax cut permanent and making it a 10-year bill. It had to be revenue neutral beyond the 10-year window. There was a post. Washington Post did a really good analysis of it. I don't have the link right in front of me though.
I read that. That was actually an opinion piece from the WAPO, and as we call it here in Virginia because we're so used to it. But I think I'm not so sure that argument necessarily holds water from a numerical perspective. What does matter, and I think this makes the larger point though, is that a lot of the things that they would now have to do on the tax reform side, they thought they could get rid of through the Obamacare rinse and repeat by saying, oh, we're getting rid of all these Obamacare taxes. Those taxes are still there, and there will still be political pressure to get rid of them. They just now have to include those taxes in a tax reform bill, which, yes, would make the other tax reforms they want to do harder. Frankly, as far as I'm concerned, anything that makes the border adjustment tax harder to be enacted is a win. So the fact that this now messes up their border adjustment tax strategy, frankly, that makes me feel even better.
It could go the other way. They could levy more border adjustment tax in order to balance the books with the cuts that they want to do. Which
means the same people who convinced the House Freedom Caucus to oppose Obamacare, the Obamacare rinse and repeat, namely the Club for Growth, the Koch brothers, or however that's pronounced, etc., etc. Those people will all still be there.
They're not the Crotch brothers or whatever you just said.
I know. Sorry. But none of those folks like the border adjustment tax either. So if the Republicans' response is, well, we'll just have to make the border adjustment tax bigger, the response that the House Freedom Caucus will hear from the groups they listen to is, well, that means that you have to oppose Paul Ryan's tax reform all the harder, or we are going to come after you. And folks like Americans for Prosperity, folks like the Club for Growth, they're still out there. They still hate the border adjustment tax, and they will still go after anybody who supports it.
Now, one thing that I think I'm kind of surprised that Paul Ryan, even though the bill would have failed, didn't bring it up for a vote, and there's one simple reason for that. If he had managed to force a recorded vote on this, he would have put a lot of those Freedom Caucus types in a very awkward position come re-election, because let's face it, we still have Obamacare because Congressman such and such voted against it. Diehard conservative Congressman such and such refused to vote against it. That's a very nice primary ad, and I think some of these guys are going to get hammered in the primary over this.
And a recorded vote would have been all the more powerful. Ted Poe's already dropped out of the caucus. Ted Poe from Texas, out of the free.
They're going to get hammered over a bill that had 17% approval.
When they're stuck with something that the base opposes, yeah.
I want to ask a question of everybody, because we've talked about now what's going on there. I'm curious about what you guys think would actually improve healthcare in this country. So I'd like to do a little roundtable. Anyone who has an idea what you think would actually bend the cost curve or make healthcare a better product in this country. And I'll start with Rebecca.
Oh, man, I was going to ask you to go last. I've been thinking about this all day. And this is a tricky line to walk, because I do understand the difference between an actual healthcare provider, i.e. a doctor or a nurse or a PT specialist or a therapist, and someone who is a business owner. In other words, someone who operates a hospital or an HMO like Kaiser or something like that. There has to be something that deals with the profit motive, and in particular, the reimbursement policies between insurers and providers. And because I come from the nonprofit world, I tend to think of the nonprofit model as a panacea for all things. And if hospitals were working to operate at zero profits, not operate at a loss, not operate at a profit, but spend as much as they take in, and if insurers were operating the same way, I think that would change the attitude a little bit and change the focus. So that would be one of the tweaks I'd like to see. There are other issues that I think about, coming from my public health advocacy background in terms of preventative care and access for all, and, putting clinics near a bus stop and things like that. But I feel like creating more of a nonprofit ideal within the healthcare delivery system would be one strong change for good.
So I think what the Republicans should do, if and when they get at this for a second time, is one, not do it through the reconciliation process, which can really create the monster of a product that we saw, and limit them in important ways in terms of achieving major policy objectives. But I think they need to do two things. I think they need to cut regulations, and I think they have to keep the Medicaid and Medicare components. There's nothing you can really do with those. I think to get rid of them would be disastrous. I think that in terms of cutting regulations, looking at removing state line barriers and things like that, implementing the types of policies that will satisfy free market conservatives and those who want to see increased competition between insurance companies. I think that's their best road forward.
Cliff?
Okay, there are two things I would like to see. The first would be increased transparency in hospital and so forth billing, because very often what you end up with are these absurdly complex bills that, let's face it, you need an accounting degree or a law degree or something else to make heads or tails of it. And the other thing would be to say to a hospital, we're going to limit how much more you can charge someone who doesn't have insurance. Because if you end up out of network, even if you have insurance, if you end up out of network, there's every chance that you're going to get royally socked and pay 2 or 3 times as much for whatever your insurance won't cover. And I think that's been one of the biggest problems we've had in the healthcare industry as of late, is that difference just keeps getting bigger and bigger, and it's landing on people who can't afford it. who would be better off, quite frankly, if instead of trying to shoehorn them into an insurance policy, we said, look, you're going to get a fair shake on what you're going to be charged.
DJ?
I think part of it is we keep conflating health insurance and health care. There are reforms we need to look at in health insurance. There are reforms we need to look at in health care. A lot of the conflicting objectives that for-profit health insurers have also exist with for-profit auto insurers and for-profit property and casualty insurers. We need to look at what has been done in those two markets to address those issues, what has succeeded, what has failed, and see what lessons we can learn regarding health insurance. Regarding health care, I think most people actually don't recognize how much present regulatory apparatus has created the disastrous situation we're in. Too many states have certificate of need regimes that essentially force new providers to get government permission to establish themselves and give their would-be competition the chance to shut them down. I think they need to go. We also need to look at the fact that we have essentially mandated that hospitals have to treat everybody. That's from a federal law in the 1980s. But we have done nothing to address the fact that that means they have to essentially treat people who may not be able to pay for the services that are provided. We spend a lot of time talking about risk corridors for insurance companies, which basically means, hey, look, if you insure the people we know you don't really want to insure, and we'll make sure that you don't lose money as a result. We should do something similar for hospitals. In fact, we should do something for hospitals for that instead of insurers and go to the root of the problem, which is that hospitals are treating people that they're not sure will pay or that they know can't pay for it. And we should say, you know what? Okay, fine. If you're a hospital, we know we told you have to treat everybody who comes into your ER. We will also make sure that you are made whole by that and you don't lose money by following a regulation that we told you that you have to follow in the 1980s. Those are some of the thoughts that come to my mind.
That was actually in Ryancare and or Trumpcare, whatever the hell we're calling it. It was dealing with the reimbursements for the medically indigent, which were under the EMTALA law, which is Emergency Medical Transfer and Labor Act, which forces hospitals to stabilize any patient who comes through their doors regardless of their ability to pay, and resulted in a lot of uncompensated care coming through the emergency room doors. And there was actually probably, I think it was, I did the math, it was something like $70 billion in reimbursements to hospitals under Medicaid law and replacing it maybe in Medicare as well, to cover hospitals for the increase they were going to see in uncompensated care if they reduced insurance coverage should Trumpcare have passed.
Right. But Rebecca, I think, would it not be the case that if there was something like that for hospitals, then there would be less economic pressure to have something like that for insurers?
I agree, and in hospitals there have been systems that allow them to write off uncompensated care in their taxes, and Medicaid has had some band-aids for it, but yeah, no, and that was one of the things that Obamacare was supposed to address by having fewer uncompensated medically indigent patients. Hospitals were going to see fewer losses on their bottom line, but again, and DJ, you and I have talked about this a number of times. Our system is jacked. It's jacked. We have, people setting prices.
I won't dispute that.
I won't dispute it either.
I mean, what Cliff talks about with the price differentials and, and what these loss ratios are for hospitals when they decide to go in network. So they're taking this necessarily discounted reimbursement rate from private insurers and from Medicare. It's this completely screwed up system where nobody knows what anything actually costs and nobody knows who's actually paying for anything. And, and there are these middlemen who are not only trying to distribute the money from the consumer to the provider, but also trying to make a profit in the meantime. And they become the gatekeepers for all things. It's a really screwed up system.
Yeah, the reality is, just to make this point, Kevin, the American healthcare morass has essentially taken the Anglosphere model, which is largely government directed, and the continental European model, which is more government regulation rather than government provision directive. We have taken the worst of each system and we've implanted them into our system.
And tied it up with a bow.
Right.
To make it the worst gift ever.
So and then here's the bow part is that we also throw employers for the most part into this mix.
Yes,
and this
exactly. We make employers responsible for the insurance provision.
And that's, that's my, how I would reform it that nobody is talking about is that we have this, system that arose out of all things, regulation again, this time wage regulation during World War II.
Exactly.
That there was labor scarcity and you could not, pay employees more, but you had to get, bodies to work. And so they offered them health care, fringe benefit instead of wages because they couldn't offer them higher wages. And now we're, stuck with this that nobody else does. And that's why we're the only ones who do it. But businesses, they're the business of business is business. And, it's not to be a healthcare provider for their employers. And we've, put them into this role and it causes all kinds of inefficiencies that shouldn't be there. It puts another layer, you don't choose any health provider that you want. You get it subsidized by your employer, which is great for you. But at the same time, you're picking from, the three choices your employers had for you, and that there would be some. Nobody wants to give up.
In my case, it was one.
Yeah,
it was a good choice, but it was still one.
Yeah.
Well, everybody is coming at this. We have an incredibly intelligent group here, but we're coming at it from a.
Thank you, Kevin.
And me.
You're pretty too.
Well, wait, no, there's an insult coming, but we're coming at it from a wonky point of view.
Well, thank you.
We're all coming at it like wonks, okay? I'm hearing all of this, this ACA and Trumpcare mumbo jumbo, and no one really is talking about the experience of being a consumer of healthcare. So let me just paint a scenario for you. Suppose the next time you went into your doctor's office, right behind the receptionist, just like in a delicatessen, there was a huge menu of everything they could possibly provide for you with a price next to it. And what if they also had a pamphlet that had all the prices on it, a to-go menu, okay? And you knew when they said, okay, Kevin, we're a little unsure about your PSA, so we want to do a PSA blood test. You could look up there and know what it's going to cost you. Okay. And if they say we're going to give you a shot, we think your whatever is too high or too low, and we're going to give you a shot, you find out not only what the shot costs, but what the process of getting the shot costs, what the all of the supplies cost. When I go to my doctor, I get a maintenance shot every couple of weeks. They break it into 4 different costs that no one will ever tell me about, and I only find out about them once the bill comes. Okay. Hospitals do this all the time.
Kevin, that is an excellent idea. That is a fantastic idea. It has a very large problem that should be fixed. And that is that most health care consumers in this country use their health insurer not just as an insurer, but also as a price negotiator.
Yes, and that's what we have to get away from. That's what this gets away from.
And I will give you my I will give you my experience so that we don't sound too wonkish, so that people understand what we're talking about. My wife requires more than the average medical care. She has a particular heart condition. So we get a whole slew of explanation of benefits from our insurers, which will give the provider's price, and then it will give the price that the insurer has told the provider they will actually charge. So what we need in addition to what you're talking about, Kevin, is yes, it would be wonderful if they had something similar to if they had a pamphlet or if they had a whiteboard that showed all their prices. But what they also need to show is an uninsured price, a Blue Cross Blue Shield negotiated price, a this negotiated price, a that negotiated price. Now, I'm in information technology. We think in information technology we can do anything. In reality, we can't do jack S. But I don't think it's impossible. You could say, okay, are you insured? Yes. Who is your insurer? This. Click, 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 click. This is your price list. That, I think, can be done.
They used to do that.
And yes, I think it should be done.
They used to do that.
Kevin, the biggest issue I see with your idea, which I like the general principle, is more the consumer being able to discern what is actually necessary care and what might be getting heaped on there by a doctor who is trying to pad his pad their billing.
But that's a problem, Cliff. Absolutely, but it's a distinct problem. They're both problems. Okay, so one doesn't preclude the other.
It's a bigger problem, exactly, because you don't know till after you've already gone and they've done whatever, and you get your EOB, and then you find out how much.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and I will actually give a very specific example, by the way, of where what you were discussing would have been nice. Down in Florida, I jumped out of a perfectly good airplane and had a rough landing. It was a very literal pain
on purpose.
In the back.
You jumped out on purpose.
Yes, it was actually
Cliff does these things. He jumps out of airplanes. He bungee jumps for fun. Cliff.
Wait, what? That's crazy. Wait, how?
First of all, the story. When the story begins, I jumped out of a perfectly good airplane. It never ends well. Never.
It really never
does. If
does.
you feel the need to defend the integrity of the airplane from which you escaped, it's going to be bad, folks. It just is.
Well, it was a Cessna,
I would only jump out of not perfectly good airplanes.
Yeah, the airplane would pretty much have to be on fire for me to jump out.
Exactly.
No, I'm going down with the plane. I'm not jumping, no matter what.
Okay, but Helena, that's a life insurance question, not a health insurance question.
Okay, that's fine. My policy is good. I just upped it.
But, okay, so I jump out of the plane, have a rough landing. I end up going to the ER, to get an X-ray, basically just to make sure I have a pre-existing, very minor back issue from where I took a tumble like 15 years ago.
Jumping out of
So
what?
I go there just to make sure that I haven't
jumping,
refractured
Cliff.
this.
So just stay on the ground.
Tell me about it. But in Kevin's scenario, what I would likely have done when I got there is said, I want the X-ray. I don't need to see a doctor. Just give me the bloody X-ray, and I'll take it to my doctor. Because the concern here was a long-term problem, rather than getting billed, an extra $400 for 15 minutes of a doctor's time. It would have just been, no, I don't. I can take this and leave, and as it was, by the way, I only got to see the doctor when we were turning to the hospital and saying, you know what, we'll just take the X-rays and go. You've taken too long, because we'd been in the ER for like 4 hours.
There's a culture thing here, in that we give, frankly, and I have friends who are doctors who will hate me for this, but frankly, it may very well be that we give doctors too much respect in everything that we do. I mean, we don't treat auto repairmen the same way we treat doctors, because doctors repair ourselves rather than repair cars. But just because they repair ourselves doesn't mean they overcharge. It doesn't mean they don't overcharge. It doesn't mean they don't make us pay for stuff that we don't need. Perhaps if we took a more cynical attitude toward healthcare providers in general, and of course these are the same healthcare providers that block out their competitions as certificate of need nonsense. So I have particular reason to be cynical. You're not in a COPN state, Kevin, so you have no idea what I'm talking about here. But the fact of the matter is, we give our medical professionals, particularly our doctors, more cultural. We treat them with a greater amount of cultural naivete than we treat any other provider in an adversarial seller-buyer relationship. And that may frankly be part of the problem.
Too much deference. I agree. I totally agree. I think at some point in the 20th century, I don't know whether this was pre-World War II, post-World War II, somehow it was decided that we wanted to get the best minds into the medical field. So as a culture, as a society, we raised the respect level, we raised the status of doctors, and along with that, we raised their salaries, their income. And it's a vestige, I think, from a long time ago. Frankly, I don't think we're still getting the best minds in the world going to med school. A lot of them are going into finance. A lot of them are going into other areas.
Well, medicine
I get
is
treated
gross,
by a lot of
Kevin.
different doctors.
Let's face it, medicine is. Your hands get real dirty. I am in a family. The fourth generation of doctors just graduated from medical school in my family. So I've had a front row seat to all of this. I, of course, am the failure and did not become a doctor because I'm just not that bright. But I'm not.
Rebecca, stop that. That's actually part of the problem. We assume that doctors are brighter than the rest of us. They're not. They have They have a particular area of expertise, and that's wonderful. But the reason that they have, say, higher salaries than you would normally expect, in part that's because we give them a prestige they don't deserve in general, but also it's in part because they have done a very good job of making sure that supply is very limited. What discussion of immigration reform have you ever heard that talks about, hey, how can we change the immigration system to get more doctors into this country? Never. What discussion of education reform has been how can we encourage more medical schools and more people to enter medical schools in this country? Never. Why?
Well, the American Medical Association is protectionist, right? Just like the American Bar Association is protectionist, and Randy Weingarten and company, right? So we have groups that are looking out for themselves to keep their rates
What I can say about doctors is the level of skill and the level of technology, the level of knowledge that a doctor has to be in practice in 2017 is very different than in 1914 when my great-grandfather was in practice. And so his salary was significantly different than what my cousin Elena's salary is going to be, because what he knew, what he studied, what he did was entirely different. He was paid in chickens. Kosher chickens, I believe. Whereas my cousin Elena will not be paid in chickens. She will be paid in these bizarrely discounted insurance reimbursements that have nothing to do with her skill and everything to do with the business arrangement.
When the Center for Medical and Medicaid Services sets up an entire pricing system that private insurers use with a small top-up to run their reimbursement regimes, and then it hands the entire system to the American Medical Association for review and approval. You don't get to complain, or they don't get to complain about insurers discounting payments and rates because they have essentially complete monopolistic control of the pricing system through the CMS AMA pricing link. I'm sorry, they don't get away with that with
let's
me.
Contextualize. Hold on. Let's contextualize the salaries here for a second, because I think this is an important piece of the conversation. A person who eventually becomes a doctor, who's earning, something in the six figures, one of the six figures, went through 4 years of college, which is roughly $200,000 if you're at a private school, less if you're at a public school, another 4 years of medical school, a residency where they're earning $30,000 a year, or an internship rather, where they're earning $30,000 a year, and then a residency. And then when they get to like an attending level, decades later, after paying, the principal and interest on their debt, are finally what the Harvard Business Journal sometimes refers to as Henrys, not mentioning that just because it's my last name, high earners, not rich yet. And the point of the Henrys, the high earners, not rich yet, is you look at them and we have conversations like this. Look how much money they're making. This is outrageous. This is part of why the system is broken. And they're making that money because they have a net worth of negative $300,000. And, as a lawyer who has a somewhat similar trajectory, but minus the abilities to save lives, I'm sensitive to that justification for the salary.
It's not as much a salary issue, because the issue here is the fact that for years, if not decades, healthcare supply has been restricted through various restrictions at the federal and the state levels that have made prices for healthcare, actual prices, whether paid directly by customers or indirectly via insurers, it has made actual healthcare prices higher in this country than they should be. Period. End of paragraph. Last page in the book.
Well, I'd like to discuss traders now that we've discussed doctors. So Devin Nunes-Adam Schiff seem to be the new odd couple in Washington. It looks like their drama is going to continue to unfold this week when
or not.
Director James
It might not unfold. It might be kept in a little origami box behind closed doors on the Capitol. There might be no unfolding whatsoever. I'm being told that I need to go demonstrate outside the doors of whatever the hearing room is as this latest hearing goes on. And I haven't been to a hearing in a couple weeks, so I'm kind of jonesing to get to a demonstration, hold up a sign, and.
Well, do you want to explain what hearing you're talking about?
It's the one where the Schiff hits the fan.
The ship hits the fan.
I just got that joke 30 seconds later. I didn't hear you correctly. There we go. That was funny.
Yeah, I was trying to figure out. I was like, is Adam Schiff running for governor? Is that why he's on TV all the time? My husband's like, no, he's just doing this because he's minority ranking member on this committee. I'm like, but I've never seen a minority ranking member do this before because this has never happened before. I'm like, all right.
What Adam Schiff is doing is essentially presenting the Democratic point of view, which is we don't know everything. We can't simply assume that any investigation of Donald Trump is utterly political, as Devin Nunes seems to insist that it is. The fact of the matter is, if Trump or the Trump campaign had contacts with folks on the Russian side, and I'm not necessarily saying they did, then the fact that we were conducting surveillance on Russian folks and the Trump people got roped into this is not the investigators' fault. It's the Trump campaign's fault. That's the kind of thing that that's the case that Adam Schiff has to make because Devin Nunes simply refuses to make it.
Well, Devin Nunes appears to have, his own butt to keep covered. He was a transition team member and has relationships with a number of folks within the Trump administration. We have to, go back into ancient history of last Monday.
Seriously.
And remember that James Comey, in a rather unprecedented move, testified in front of the House Intelligence Committee, Devin Nunes and Adam Schiff's committee, and sat there and told the world and everyone that Donald Trump's campaign is under investigation for potential collusion with Russians? Something Russian. I'm not even sure who in Russia at this point we're dealing with.
There were Russians who were clearly involved in a desinformatia campaign to undermine confidence in our American system in general, and frankly in Mrs. Clinton in particular. And the question that Mr. Comey is trying to investigate 6 days and 12 hours ago when our forefathers held a hearing on this was how much did the Trump campaign know about the desinformatia campaign? Now,
Devin Nunes says nothing.
Of course
Adam Schiff says everything, and James Comey says no comment.
Right. Well, James Comey is James Comey actually has to investigate this sort of thing because he's the head of the FBI, and he's in the same situation he frankly was in last October when Congress asks him questions, he sort of has to try to answer them. But again, I think from a larger point, the Democratic Party and my new party needs to be very careful about this. Because I remember being a Republican during the whole Whitewater thing in the 1990s. And we kept talking about, well, this was illegal and that was illegal and everything else. We never explained to the American people, look, we're talking about a situation where the guy who is now president of the United States helped his business partner bilk the taxpayers for $50 million when his savings and loan went under. Had that been explained to the American people, they might have been more interested in Whitewater than they were. For the 52% of Americans who did not vote for Hillary Clinton, we need to keep explaining to them, look, this is about a guy who's president of the United States who thinks that Vladimir Putin is actually amenable to American interests when in fact he is hostile to American interests, hostile to self-determination, and hostile to democracy across the board. And we're trying to figure out just how far up Putin's ass Trump's head is, because we need to figure out how much policy damage to American interests could happen with him in the White House. That, I don't think, has been explained to the American people to the extent that it needs to be. There's been so much focus on the legality that there's not been enough focus on the policy damage that Trump can do. I think if we did that, the American people might take, particularly the 52% that voted against her, might also take an interest in, oh, that's why you're worried about this sort of thing. Okay, we'll be worried about it too.
So in other words, you're saying that Congress talks like those of us on this podcast where we get super, super wonky and try and show how smart we are and stuff.
Yes.
And forget to talk about real things.
Yuppers.
Well, talking about real things and health insurance, I want to complain for a second that I took my dog to the vet and the bill was $693.
Oh my God.
And she has insurance. So, yes, right?
What happened to your poor dog?
Kevin, that was your signal to intervene.
We won't stop
I
to
have
this
to complain to
universal
someone.
healthcare
No
for
one will
pets.
listen. Exactly. Yeah. Well, what's wrong with her is she has a mom who does what my mom did, which is take, your child, for lack of a better term, to the doctor anytime there's a cough. But also the problem is because she can't talk, I don't know, I don't know what to do. Like, should I not do the x-ray? I don't know.
I took my dog to the doctor last year.
Wrong?
It was $700, and it turned out she ate an ice cream sandwich, and it made her sick to her stomach. I refer to it as the $700 ice cream sandwich.
Do you have insurance?
No, because she's a dog.
Yeah. You gotta get insurance.
I have insurance for my kids. I take them to the doctor far less because they don't, when they eat an ice cream sandwich, it's fine.
Well, now that we know that Helena's dog has better health insurance than my kid, let's call it a podcast. I want to thank everybody for listening. Please follow us on Twitter at MPU Podcast and on Facebook at facebook.com/More Perfect Union Podcast. And share our link on your Facebook timeline so your friends can discover us as well. And if you would like to join in on our political debates between shows, join us in our Facebook group, Open Fire Politics. We're all there, and we'd love to see you too. And with that, we bid you fond adieu. Remember, the After Dark show comes up on Thursday, where you hear what we talk about after the podcast ends. And everybody, what's going to be our first topic after the podcast ends?
I need another drink.
Another drink, absolutely. Okay, good night, everybody.